Name's Travis Miner, and I'm here on behalf of Open Door Education with Marla Platt, who works with AchieveCoach College Consulting as an expert in college admissions. And she's here today to talk with us about the recommendations letter portion of applying to college. Marla, thank you so much for being here with us. Let's start with the most important question. What is a recommendation?
Hi, Travis. That's a super question. So, a letter of recommendation is a letter that high school teachers write on behalf of students to reflect on how that student conducts themselves in the classroom. Recommendation letters will talk about how a student engages with classroom material, how that student might comport themselves in the classroom as a member of the community. And these letters lend a lot of insight to colleges about the student's potential for academic success. One thing to note is that recommendation letters come from core academic teachers. So math or science teachers, social science teachers, English teachers, or foreign language teachers.
That's very helpful to know. I'm curious, why do colleges need these recommendations? Don't students' grades tell enough of the story? And sort of how do colleges use them in the admissions process?
Sure, that's a super question. So yeah, grades do tell a lot of the story, but a teacher's recommendation letter lends a little bit more of a personal perspective on that individual. So teachers, working with students throughout the course of typically a whole academic year. So there's lots of opportunities to watch how that student engages in the classroom, the detail that they put into their lab work if they're a science student, the kind of engagement they have in the classroom, clarifying questions to advance conversations in the classroom. So recommendation letters lend a little bit more of a personalized perspective that colleges find really valuable.
That's interesting. So it sounds like it really does go a layer beyond just what they're seeing on a transcript. It doesn't have that additional context or insight to it. Uh,
Absolutely, because it's data, right? A grade is a piece of data, but it doesn't say everything about the student on a personalized level.
mm, I I like that it adds that layer to the process. Now, how many of these recommendations does a student typically need when applying to college?
So colleges talk about recommendation letters in two strands. So almost all colleges ask for a letter of recommendation from the school counselor. So that lends one perspective about the student in the context of the entire class in the high school, and perhaps a perspective about that student in the entire high school community. And colleges will ask for teacher recommendations, typically one, sometimes two. I typically advise students to have two academic teachers on board with them to provide recommendations, especially if those teachers have different perspectives about the student and can say something different from one another to lend additional context. So for example, a science teacher may have some perspective about that student from maybe a more quantitative or logical perspective, or how a student might comport themselves in a lab situation, while a teacher in a humanities class or a discussion-based class has a whole lot of different insight about how that student might write or present their ideas in conversation.
Interesting. So it sounds like students want to be thinking about not just the individual teachers, but sort of how they fit together in terms of their recommenders. So I I can imagine this can be sort of a stressful situation for a student. They're asking someone who's been their teacher to do this thing for them on their behalf. What can a student do to help support a solid recommendation? I guess both in thinking about how we support getting the recommendation, but also, are there things that teachers might ask for or ways that a student can help ensure that they're getting the best possible recommendation from the folks they ask?
This is an excellent question. So to support a good letter of recommendation, I think students need to think about how they're coming across in the classroom relatively early in the school year. And junior year is where I'm sitting right now. So, meaning that I think the junior year is where students really need to think about how they are showing up in their classroom. So early in the junior year, first quarter, first semester, think about how you're starting to show up in the classroom. Where are you most engaged? Where are teachers most likely to get to know you? And continue that narrative in your mind as you're moving throughout the school year. When it comes time to actually ask your teachers for recommendations, uh, usually in the spring of the junior year is a great time to start actually putting the ask out there. Then students can ask their teacher specifically, what do you need to write a good letter for me? Some teachers are fully capable of writing a solid letter on their own based on their observations throughout the school year. Other teachers value kind of like a little mini brag sheet or a summary of what the student has gotten out of the class, what their college goals might be, where they have grown, what the challenges they might have had in the class. And that gives that teacher material on which to base their recommendation.
Excellent. I really love the way that that gives a proactive bent to it, and that you're not asking for a recommendation and then waiting to see what they need, but to proactively ask what can I do to help you in writing this recommendation. This has to be a tricky choice for some students. So if a student's struggling between two teachers they really like, or they feel know or can say something important about them, how should students think about making that decision?
Yeah, that's an embarrassment of riches when students have a couple of teachers or sometimes more from whom to choose and they can't decide. So I ask students to sit back and think about what each teacher may say about them. Which teacher has the most to say, the most positive pieces to talk about? Students might be surprised to know that the best recommendations may not necessarily come from the teacher who awarded the A. It could be the teacher who sees the student maybe who has struggled a little bit during the school year, but who's made the extra effort to go for extra help, or who asks clarifying questions in the classroom. Or who really shows that they want to do well and cares about the learning. So first, stop and think about what that teacher might say or those teachers might say. Think about if what each teacher would say would be different. So there's contrast between the recommendations. Each recommendation is an opportunity for college admissions to learn more about the student. So you want to think about which teachers may say something different about you. But the last thing you want is to have recommendations that will be repetitive of one another. So stop and think about it, and think about which teachers are most likely to glow.
It's really reassuring to hear that it's not just that you should only ask the teachers whose classes are easy for you, or who gave you A's from day one, but that students that are, or teachers that have seen you grow and work and go for extra help and have gotten to know you, that might be maybe even a more powerful recommendation than simply someone who says, yes, this student did very well in my class, and therefore I haven't gotten to know them that well even.
Exactly.
So I know that some students will have different teachers split up throughout the year. Some teachers they might be with the whole year. Some teachers they might see only for a semester. Does that matter? Should students be thinking about like how long a teacher had them in deciding who to ask for recommendation?
Yeah, I'd say yes to that, Travis. So ideally, recommendations come from more recent teachers. When I say more recent to when the student is applying to college. So the junior year, once again, is usually the right time for teacher recommendations to have their greatest impact, to tell the best story about that student. So a full year teacher from junior year will have known that student for a long time and have the most background from which to draw, or the most material on which to base a recommendation. So that's the gold standard. Sometimes students will have great success with teachers who they only had for half a year. So if that half year teacher is in the latter part of junior year, then that teacher may be more likely to remember more about the student. So ideally, a full year student from the junior year. If there is not a full year teacher from the junior year, then it would be a half year student, half year teacher from the junior year. And then if students need to go back to sophomore year, sometimes kids will do that, but it's not preferable because it's a little bit old. So
Mhm.
try to get the teacher from the junior year who's the full year.
Okay, that's it sounds like it's really important that even from the start of junior year, that students are starting to think about who of these teachers might be one of my recommenders. So far we focused on recommendations from teachers in core academic subjects. What does it look like, or is it appropriate for a student to have a recommendation that might be from a coach or employer or someone who's heavily involved in their extracurricular work?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up very often. Students are more than participants in the classroom. There are coaches that they're seeing after school, they have jobs, and these other people get to know them pretty well. So colleges will indicate up to how many recommendations they will accept. So again, teacher recommendations are fundamental. So if a college will accept a coach recommendation or maybe an employer recommendation or some other mentor, those can be very valuable if that recommendation will add some other aspect of the students, maybe focus, their maturity, their dedication to their task, their leadership. So those recommendations can also be really valuable and are worth including if there's something valuable that the student thinks that individual will share.
Absolutely. So it's reassuring to know that students can think beyond just the classroom in terms of who those recommenders might be, but we do have to be really conscientious in considering what is the way in which that person knows me. What do they add to the picture that I might be presenting in my application? When does this actually happen? When should students be thinking about asking a teacher, a coach, an employer for a recommendation letter?
Yeah, so by the time April or May of the junior year is on board, then that's when students have probably demonstrated a lot of their academic talents, their strengths, their focus, and that's a great time for kids to start thinking about asking teachers for their recommendations. So, one thing you don't want to do is wait to the last minute. And when I say last minute, probably just before the deadlines, senior year. Keep in mind that when students are asking teachers for recommendations or coaches or employers, they're doing you a favor. It takes time to write a thoughtful recommendation, and teachers in particular are probably writing for a bunch of different students. So the kind and courteous thing to do is to ask with plenty of time for the teacher to write, um, and ask the teacher in person with a thank you and a smile, because they are doing you a favor. So you don't want to wait till the last minute. So junior year, toward the end of junior year is a right time to ask.
I remember when I was in high school that there were certain teachers who were very clear on, this is the number of recommendations I am willing to write in a given year. And if you ask me and I've already made that commitment to students, then I'm sorry, you're out of luck. So that is fantastic advice. And I so appreciate the idea of going in person, that you are asking them a favor that has a meaningful impact on your future, and to do them the honor of asking them in person. And I'm sure that when students get their college acceptances, sending a thank you to those recommenders is probably makes their day, knowing that they've had a positive impact on that student's trajectory. And I hope students take the time to do that too. Now, these recommendations that students have requested, they certainly get sent to the college. Does the student ever get to see them?
Well, typically not. So when students are filling out their common application, there is an element that's called the FERPA. And the FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And students are asked to waive their rights, waive the FERPA. And that means that the students basically are waiving their rights to read a recommendation. And the reason for that is because colleges want teachers to feel comfortable to write an honest recommendation. And teachers feel the freedom to write an honest recommendation when they know that there's not somebody who'll be necessarily looking at that recommendation. So it enables the teachers to write more freely and honestly, and colleges appreciate that. And also teachers feel freer to write an honest recommendation and get the sense that you, the student, trust me to write an honest recommendation. So no, the students don't typically get to see them, but there are teachers who do want to share their recommendations, especially when it's a really glowing or positive one with their students. But by and large, students should not expect to see their recommendations, and they should trust their teachers to write something positive for them. So trust is fundamental to the whole teacher recommendation piece of the college application.
And I so appreciate how that really starts before you've even met the teacher you might be asking for a recommendation, and thinking about how you're showing up for your classes during your junior year, making a good impression, putting in the work that when students do those things, they put themselves in a position where they can confidently trust that their teacher is going to write a recommendation that they are proud to be sharing with colleges. This is such helpful advice, Marla. Thank you so much for making the time to share your insight and experience here. If families are curious about learning more about the work that you do with students, what's the best way for them to be in touch with you?
Yeah, thank you, Travis. It's a pleasure for me to have been here today speaking with parents and students. So if parents or students are interested in being in touch with me, the best way is to check out my website, www.achievecoach.com, or do a Google search for Marla Platt, and all of that will pop up. And feel free to phone me or to email me via my website. There's a contact page, and I'd be happy to receive any inquiries and answer any questions for parents or students.
Terrific. Thank you so much, Marla.
Thank you, Travis. Have a wonderful day.
You too.